Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining our Tools for Parenting and Living series. It's my absolute pleasure and delight to have with us Mrs. Shevi Samet, who is just an extraordinary educator. She's a high school teacher at Breuer's High School, Girls High School. And she's a mentor to dozens, probably hundreds of young married women. Folks, the world is divided up into people who get it and people who don't get it. She gets it, as you will see. Our topic for tonight is what your married children wish you knew. And the idea for it came in a discussion that I had with Mrs. Samet. She happens to be best friends with one of our daughters, one of our amazing daughters. And we were talking about the idea of people my age. I'm 60 years old. That folks my age, there is a generation gap always. With technology today, I think it would be fair to say that there's a generation gap every, Mrs. Samet, 2 years, 5 years?
6 months.
What? 6 months, right. So we were talking about, what does it look like and what do parents need to know about the reality that's going on in today's environment. We're certainly, today's generation is certainly parenting very differently. They have different experiences. They themselves were raised on technology, not the way it is today. But there's so much to discuss and so much to talk about. So, Mrs. Samet, again, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on. So tell the folks my age, what do they need to know? What's different about when we got married in 1981 and right. You young ladies who are...
I first have to issue a disclaimer that nothing that I'm sharing is, of course, my own experience or a reflection of my wonderful parents and in-laws. When we were having this conversation initially, I was sharing with you some of the more common, I don't want to use the word complaints. I think feedback is better, but there was a trend. Sometimes it can sound like complaints when it's coming from a young person, but it's feedback. And I was noticing themes in the different, areas where young couples and young parents were sharing feedback and where they felt like there might have been a gap in understanding. So all I really want to do tonight is, amplify their voices and share with everybody here, the common trends that I've perceived and the threads that I hear. But of course, my parents are wonderful, my in-laws are wonderful, and my own personal experience. I always say it doesn't have to be a factor because Baruch Hashem, enough people share with me their experiences that I don't have to fall back on my own. One thing that I would start off by saying is that I'm not 100% sure that as many things have changed as we assume. A lot, definitely the context for a lot of the struggles that couples are facing as married couples and as parents, the context has changed. I think technology has amplified a lot of the difficulties, but I'm not sure how many things are truly brand new. I think they might be similar to what people experienced in the past, but maybe with a twist, right? Or maybe somewhat amplified because of technology, but I'm not 100% sure that it's really new. The two kind of areas that I would want to share with everybody here is young couples as a couple and what they wish their parents knew about what's going on in their marriage, and young couples as young parents and what they wish their parents knew about their parenting. And I think that, there's certainly an overlap, but these are probably the two main areas of concern. Which one should we do first?
Let's do the child. Let's do children. Let's do kids first. What is it?
Okay. As parenting. Okay. So
I just want to tell you, Mrs. Samet, when I was writing up a little promo for your talk,
okay.
Did you see that? You see that? What in the world is a timeout?
You actually know my children.
Right. You're wonderful kids. But I wrote there like, what's this whole timeout thing, right? That typically, again, people in my generation look around and say that they're permissive and they're letting the kids do whatever they want, and what are they, equal partners now? Right. what's all this personal space thing? So tell us, how is raising children different now? And what does my generation need to know?
Right. Well, I think that, young people today who are raising their children and are just starting out on their parenting journeys or are earlier on in their parenting journeys than their parents, are raising children in a world that didn't really exist even when they were growing up, and certainly a world that didn't exist when their parents were growing up. In terms of the challenges that exist, I'm referring primarily to technology, but it's really much bigger than that and much broader than that. One of the things that has been observed, and this is not my own unique observation, is the fact that many of our parents, and I'm gonna, let's just broadly, that generation, let's say 50 to 70, right, were raised by parents who were Holocaust survivors, or born in the shadow of the Holocaust, or maybe were survivors of the Depression, and they were very much in what we would call a survival state, right? And a lot of providing for your child and raising your child was focused on your child's physical needs. If your child was physically safe, if your child was fed, if your child was sheltered, then your child was well taken care of, right? And paying attention to, all of these emotional nuances, like, the social emotional well-being of a child, it seems like a luxury, right? Or maybe a distraction. And I think that we're moving into a generation more now where that has really become a priority. When you ask people nowadays, what do you hope for your children? What do you want for your children, right? Certainly, happiness is still a factor, but like an emotional well-being is very high up there on the list. Add to that, different trends in parenting, reactions to previous trends in parenting, maybe people experiencing a parenting style that really didn't resonate with them, and they feel like they survived more than thrived with that style, and they're looking for something different, they're looking for something new. Specifically, they're looking to move away from a very, what they perceive to be restrictive. Now, I always say that there's a very fine line between preservative and restrictive. We often get it confused. And more often than not, Can you
explain what you mean by that, the difference
between preservative and restrictive? Okay. So most often, right, somebody who has our best interest at heart, right, is looking to preserve. So you could really take a Torah analogy, right? The entire structure of halacha is designed to preserve, right, the integrity of our relationship with Hashem. There are just underlying spiritual ideals. Every halacha has like that anchor in terms of a spiritual ideal in our relationship with Hashem, right? And we have halacha as a pathway of actualizing that tangibly in terms of our actions and behavior. So by definition, halacha is preservative, right? It's designed to preserve our relationship with Hashem. However, many times it feels restrictive, right? And I always, the example that I give my students is lemons. I don't know if you've ever preserved lemons or if you've ever watched lemons being preserved, but this is how, I'll run you through it briefly. This is how you preserve lemons. So you take the lemons and you quarter them, and you fill a jar with them, and you're squeezing them down, right? And you're adding salt, and you're squeezing down, allowing the natural juices of the lemon to become extracted. And as the lemons, slowly preserve more space, right? They shrink, and you continue to pack down more and more and more and more. Now, if you're a lemon at the bottom of this jar, right, you're shrieking by now. Like, enough already. How much, right? How much are you going to squeeze me? How much are you going to put pressure on me, right? But we understand, or someone who understands the science behind preservation understands that if you leave any kind of room, the lemons will spoil, they won't preserve properly, they'll become rotten, right? So that's what I mean by this fine line. What often is preservative can feel restrictive. And it's also a fine line in terms of how we give it over. What we want to do, what we want to convey to our children is something preservative, but it can often come out as more restrictive in terms of of our response. So I think what a lot of children today or younger, I'm not sure what kind of generation are we talking, like me and younger? Is that fair?
No, you're so young already.
I'm so young.
I mean, look, it's really like the way I think of it. I'm the youngest technically I'm one of the youngest members of the baby boomers, right?
Right.
So, the idea would be parents are raising children, let's say, from 0 to age 10 or 15.
Right.
The older kids have really different experiences.
Right. Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is that today's parents really want a different relationship with their children.
Right.
And what does that look like?
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that parents today are placing value on the relationship itself over certain factors in the relationship that were really non-negotiable in previous generations, or at least that's how it looks, right? I'd rather a relationship with my children than, insist that my child always speak respectfully to me, right? There's this kind of prioritizing the relationship and the connection over everything else. Now, from an educational perspective, we know that that connection is the foundation for learning. If we don't feel connected, right, to our teacher or to the material or whatever it might be, if we don't feel connected, we just can't learn.
If I may, Reb Ner Horowitz, a friend of mine, he says that adults have the ability to, exactly what you're saying, adults have the ability to separate the vehicle of knowledge, who's transmitting the knowledge, to the knowledge. I needed to take a nursing course. I needed to go to chemistry. The teacher, right, I have no relationship with, but I'll take the information. Right. The children typically, if the first part doesn't work, the relationship doesn't work, they're much less likely to accept the knowledge.
Right. And I see more and more younger parents leaning more towards a respectful or gentle parenting approach. That's, there's a lot of different ways to describe it. But, I hesitate to call it a newer trend because that makes it sound like something that's, just passing through before we're on to the next. But essentially parenting that prioritizes the social and emotional well-being of a child, prioritizes learning and teaching those skills, and prioritizes the parent-child relationship before, as opposed to really focusing on behavior.
Right.
Okay,
right.
And seeing all behavior as a form of communication in and of itself, and as opposed to addressing the behavior at, on the surface, to really go beneath the behavior and to address the underlying need that's driving the behavior. I think this is something that a lot of people can really understand around teens. Right? You see teens and you see teens acting out, or you see teens, like speaking in a disrespectful way, and you can say, okay, I'm going to overlook that and focus on the relationship and see that there's an underlying need. But the truth is that that's really always been the case. Behavior is always a form of communication, from, a very, from a baby literally crying, requesting food, to a tantruming toddler, to, whatever else it might be. This child is trying to communicate something to you. Right? They don't have the skills or the ability to, ask for it in the way that you deem appropriate, right? Or maybe they've tried and they haven't gotten your attention, so they're going to result to behavior that you maybe, don't approve of. And while that behavior in and of itself can be problematic, what's more problematic is the fact that the child is resorting to this behavior because they don't have a necessary skill. So gentle or respectful parenting would say that in that case, what we want to do is restore connection, right? And once we've restored connection and the child is in, a place where they can learn, teach the missing skill, right?
Where the rubber meets the road is, right? We go, not you, of course, and not in my family, but folks my age will go to spend Yom Tov with their children. And they're spending, a long weekend or something, and they look around the room and they see
chaos.
What do they say? Right. So they say, what's
going on here?
What
happened to the type ship that you grew up in? This appears so permissive. Now, I do have to say that because for a lot of parents, this is newer, even for them. A lot of people who are raising their children today, they were not raised this way. And they are, many of us, I'm going to include myself in this, are still learning to navigate, this type of parenting. So it's not in and of itself meant to be a permissive style of parenting. It's supposed to be very boundary, but at the same time, you know, a lot of us are still fumbling through it also, and especially, you know, Yantif time, people aren't on schedule or whatever it might be, you might not see the best version of this style of parenting. So that's also something to, you know, to keep in mind.
And the truth is that that what we know now, today's parents should say, I'm the grandparent, right? So you know, parents today are far more knowledgeable of what's going on with their children than in my generation. We were able to pull stuff that kids today could never get away with. Es chata ani masker, my sins of my youth. We had a carpool. I lived in Bell Harbor, Queens, and we went into Tarvadas together. There were 4 of us. I was the oldest.
Okay.
My tzaddik brother of Yehuda and 2 kids from the neighborhood. And I decided that it wasn't fair to have yeshiva erev Shavuos.
Okay.
That's my whole thing. I was 11 years old.
That makes sense. You're learning the whole night. Why should you learn erev Shavuos also?
Exactly. That's exactly what I said. I said, hey, that's exactly. I said, well, come on, give me a break. This is not fair. So I told the other kids, and my brother's a tzaddik, he listened to, you know, whatever. He must have been horrified by the whole thing. So I told the couple, you better tell your parents, tell the kids, tell your mom there's no school. And we got away with it for years.
Wow. I'm impressed.
I look at that and I say, look, my parents were wonderful, wonderful parents.
Yeah.
They didn't know what I was doing. And you know, there's a what you're saying, there's a I believe, of course, I spent my life preaching and trying to get people to have that type of relationship with the children. Automatically, you're going to have an erosion of that, whatever you want to call it, mora, you know, fear, or I'm actually going to talk tomorrow night, a deep dive into teenagers, and the title is, I'm trying to express this point, mentor or supervisor. That's the key. All 6 classes. Right. Are you a mentor? Are you a supervisor, or both?
Yeah. And you know, I mean, parenting presumes that you are putting your child's best interest before your own personal needs. Right? I think that's pretty foundational. And the truth is that, you know, the Torah is perfect in its guidelines for how children should interact with their parents. Parents, however, are not always so perfect in conveying those guidelines to their children in a way that doesn't come across as, you know, this is for me. You need to respect me because I need to feel respect, versus you need to respect me because how else will you learn respect, right? And respect is foundational, and I need you to understand that a no is a no, because sometimes Hashem will tell you no, right? But it's the ego is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I see a lot of children today really, and when I say children, again, I'm including myself and the young couples I speak to often who are trying to, you know, from the get-go, prioritize their own relationship with their children. To really try and work through, you know, that ego and that, and again, and this is not, I really truly hope that this is not coming across as any, you know, as a criticism.
Coming across the way it is.
Yeah, no, because I think that it was much more natural. I think that when, you know, when I think children more, you know, just intuitively understood that their parents had their best interest at heart. And I think parents maybe, you know, again, they weren't competing with as much, right, in terms of what their children were exposed to. Every home was really a nucleus. You know, your own home was your own home. And now we have all of these other influences that are penetrating our home that we're contending with also. So I think that, the stories that I hear from, let's say, my parents and my in-laws generation, where they would say, what do you mean? I would never have, said that to my parent. Or what I like to say a lot is, I feel like my kids say everything that when I was a child, I thought. Right? My parents never even thought it.
I gotta tell you, a lot of that is selective memory. I gotta tell you, back in the day,
it's possible. Hundreds
of times over my interaction with parents,
Yeah.
a father will complain to me that a kid's not davening well. It's really honestly like this. So say my son's doesn't daven shul. So I say, well, how old is he? 10. Well, when did you start davening? So he says, what are you kidding? I was 7 years old. I sat by my father's side the whole time. When I had a little time and spunk, I
Yeah.
would ask for the father's number. I promise you, many, many times I would call the father and say, hello, I'm here with your son. When did he start?
When did you start
"Oh, about 15.
Yeah, exactly. No, so 100%.
The people say that we didn't speak out and we didn't, but look, it definitely was different. But let's make it real again. So
Yeah.
the parent tells the grandparent tells the parent, right? My generation tells your generation, what's with the kids? And what do you answer? What would you coach your parent? Not with you, but what would you coach a parent to say when their parent, when people my age say, what's going on with these kids? Like they just pick themselves up and leave the table whenever they want to. And you're thinking to yourself, my kid was in yeshiva for 55 hours this week. And that's the trade-off. So how do you explain that?
So it's tricky, and it really depends on the relationship that you have with your parents. You know, some parents really invite that kind of back and forth, like, tell me, you know, what you're doing with your kids. And other parents, you know, will ask that question because they want to be appeased. You know, what's with the children? And because they want you to say, I'm so sorry, Mom, you know, I'm not doing as good a job as you did, kind of a thing. But what I would actually advocate is parents, you know, grandparents and parents and grandchildren are spending Yom Tov together, especially if you know that you have a child that might, you know, the behavior or the way that you deal with that behavior might potentially antagonize your parents. Have a conversation before.
With the parents?
With the parents, yeah. If you're going to your parents for Yom Tov, right? I say, you know, it's been a while since we came for Yom Tov. I want to fill you in, you know, on the things that are important to us and, you know, how we've chosen to respond to certain things. I know it might seem a little strange to you, you know, or you might have a problem with it. And, you know, and I completely respect that, you know, so that's kind of from the perspective of the child, what they can do to kind of alleviate it somewhat. To give advice to a parent who questions how their child is parenting, I don't know, is that my place?
I'll tell you what I say. I give grandparenting classes.
Yeah.
I give grandparenting classes, and one of the things that I say is that you're not supposed to parent your grandchildren.
Yeah.
That's not your job, and you're supposed to spoil them, and you're supposed to be all chesed, all rachamim, no din. And
Isn't that the best part of being a grandparent?
I think that's
I remember when my oldest was born, and he was in. My father was actually, we were living in Eretz Yisrael. My father was in Eretz Yisrael at the time. He happened to have been there when my son was born, and he came to the hospital and he was, you know, holding my son, and he looks at me and he goes, "I've been waiting for this my whole life," and he hands him back to me. It's like, isn't that the best part? You know, like, I've been waiting my whole life to enjoy the nachas and have none of the responsibility. And when it does come up from time to time with my, you know, even with my own parents, I'll remind them of that. It's just, these ones are just for nachas, right? You cried over us and you toiled over us. These ones, just enjoy, however the chips fall.
I died for the grandchildren, just for the record.
I heard.
But you know, it's interesting. It's fascinating what you said about that the parents should prep their parents, the grandparents, when they come for Yom Tov, especially if they have a child. You know, I didn't, honestly, as I was listening to you, I didn't tell parents enough of that.
Yeah.
I'm constantly coaching parents who have very challenging kids.
Yeah.
And I probably should do more of that.
Yeah. A lot of it is about expectations. Yeah. A lot of it is about expectations. Now, sometimes this can get uncomfortable. Sometimes parents haven't shared the full scope of, you know, what they are dealing with their children. And I do firmly believe that that's something that's every parent's personal choice. And it might be, you know, difficult for the grandparents to, you know, realize that, like, wait, there's more going on with this kid and I don't know about it, and my child is choosing not to share with me, and that can, you know, that can be hurtful in and of itself. But I do believe that that's something that every parent has the right to to handle that situation however they want. And so even in the course of a conversation like this, the grandparents might have questions, but have you tried this? But have you considered that? Right? In my day, we this, that, and the other thing. And I encourage young parents to say, hear your parents out. It really doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
Hear them out. And more often than not, this is really coming from a good place. Like parents either, really they genuinely don't fully understand. They of course don't want to see their children suffering. They don't want to see their grandchildren suffering, and that's what they're picking up on, like maybe potentially a difficult situation, right? It really, as to the extent that you can, to really hear your parents out, and whether or not you choose to take their advice, right? Or follow any of the leads that they give you, I daven in shul next to so-and-so and he's an expert, here's his number, he said, whether or not you choose to follow up on that is completely and totally up to you.
Listening, they should always do.
My personal feeling.
I just want to share with you, just to close this out, because I want to talk about the couples that we talked about earlier, the couples in their own family. I asked a very senior gadol, a sage of a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar of this generation, that I've been fortunate to present questions to, and I asked something that does come up often. That's why I said I should have coached them. I do tell them to do it, but it usually comes after the fact.
Right.
But the question was, if parents are getting advice that with this particular child, they're not keeping Shabbos, they're having difficulty, they're rowdy, and the parents are getting coached to hang in there, and they'll make a fuss and pick your battles, and as difficult, and they go to the grandparents, and the grandparents, unfortunately, sometimes they're hurt. I'm not judging them, but they say nasty, hurtful things to the grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I asked this question, obviously, then of course at that point I'll say, I didn't have a real conversation with your parents, explain what's going on, explain that you're going for counseling, and this is the advice that you got from this.
Right.
What happens if they don't stop?
Yeah.
With the children, is it okay for kibbut av, for the respect, this kibbut av, the respect for our parents? Do parents have a waiver on that if they feel it's going to harm their child? And I was told absolutely.
Yeah.
I was told that absolutely the parents should tell their parents.
Right.
I coached them to say, my child has asthma and you're smoking. That's what I tell them to say. We have a child, the child has asthma. We do everything we can to have them avoid secondary smoke.
Right.
Which is nasty comments and any of that stuff.
Right.
You really want to come, but I understand if you're in pain and you can't stop.
Yeah.
But we're not coming. We're a family and we're doing this together. And as you can imagine what that means to a child, to hear the parents say, this is not okay. I want you to respect your grandparents, but usually the parents, honestly, some grandparents, they'll be on, and I tell the grandparents, be honest and say, I can't take it. I'm sorry. And what you said was very wise about having them go in advance. So tell us about families, Mr. Samet. Shevi, tell me
about couples.
Couples, what's it like today? What's your parents know?
So I'll just briefly say that I actually, in the last couple of weeks since we talked about doing this, every young woman who I spoke to, I asked them, what do you wish your parents knew about your marriage?
Oh, thank you.
About your marriage. So I'm going to share, I'm going to share from that perspective. I'm primarily sharing from the perspective of what daughters wish their parents knew, because, I speak to, I teach college and I speak to, young married women after the fact. So I hear more of their perspective than their husbands, but I think we can probably, extrapolate. So I would say that, first of all, technology makes it a lot more difficult for a child or a mother or father who's having a hard time cutting those apron strings. It makes it even harder, because a child can physically leave their parents' home and physically move into a different home with their spouse and still be very, very tethered, to their parents. Their parents are literally in their pockets.
Digitally,
yes, literally in their pockets. And it feels so natural when you have a question, when you're not sure about something, when you want advice or guidance, to pick up the phone and ask whoever, who, the person you've asked until this point, which, could very possibly be your parents. But that, then that couple doesn't have the opportunity to really turn toward each other and problem solve together, because I see this happening both times. They're each, have this tether to their, to their home. And that's always, by the way, been a bit of a challenge, right? For couples to kind of physically leave the home of their parents, as the Torah tells us, and turn towards each other. The reason that the Torah has to specify it so clearly is because it's not easy, right? It's something that has to actively be pursued. It won't always feel natural in every single relationship. But in previous generations, people would either, physically maybe move to a different location. They would visit their parents when they visited their parents. They would speak to their parents when they speak to their parents. But now it's constant. There's constant texting and there's constant WhatsApping and FaceTime, and I'll even overhear people in stores sometimes, young women in stores, should I buy this? Should I do this? What do you think? And I'm like, oh, that's so nice that they're, asking their husband, and it's not their husband, it's their mother, right? So to a certain extent, that can be normal. Maybe your husband doesn't need to know if you're buying the gray T-shirt or the white T-shirt, and your mother might be a better address for that. But it just becomes really, really excessive. Right. And again, I think that having conversations in advance with your children, not just when your children are engaged, but even leading, as they go through shidduchim, leading up to marriage, to really talk to them about what kind of dynamic, right, do you hope to have with them when they are married, right? A lot of young people are very worried and afraid. They don't want to disappoint their parents. They feel a tremendous amount of, gratitude, certainly to their parents. Some might feel a little bit beholden because they are accepting financial support from their parents. And I think that parents giving their children permission to not just physically leave the home, but to really, emotionally and spiritually also cling to their spouse as opposed to their parents, that permission really, truly means a lot. I would say especially to a kala, but I think both people need to hear it and say, no, if that's what works for the two of you, that's what works for the two of you, right? Especially, as they progress in their marriage, there can be any number of reasons why a married couple is choosing not to come for Yantif, cannot attend a simcha, is coming but only for a short time and leaving early, whatever it might be, right? Calling more often, less often. And certainly it can be painful to the parents if they feel slighted. But, and absolutely you can have a conversation about it, but preferably maybe not in the moment, not at the simcha that they're leaving, in your opinion, too soon. It doesn't have to be right then and right there. And, examine the possibility that it's pretty likely that there's more to it that you don't fully understand. Now, I'm obviously not talking about if you have, concerns. That's a separate, that's a separate piece. But talking about just the normal, roller coaster of the first few months, first couple of years of marriage, it's so important for couples to really be able to gel as a couple.
I don't know. I wonder if Leah will remember, but with our three daughters,
yeah.
When they got closer to, they were engaged, and then as they were closer to marriage, I took a number of index cards and I wrote on it, a father, mother, a sibling, friend, teacher, whatever. I said, stack them in order, like which one is the most, and whatever, they would put, obviously they were talking to me, they put their parents first. Mm-hmm. And then I would write husband then. I said, where does this go? And I said, I put it on top of the pile. And I said, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's what the Torah says. That's what Al-Kenya, I actually did this. I was letting them know that we understand it the way, what?
Yeah, and that permission really, really means a lot.
I'm a visual learner, so I did it with the car. But
I get, very, very common question that I get is, out of the blue, right? I haven't heard from a girl in a couple of months, and she'll text me, Mrs. Samet, how often is normal for a young couple to go to their parents for Shabbos? And right away, I know there's some sort of conflict, either between the couple and parents, right? They're going more to this, more to that, right? And really what I a lot of times these couples, again, because they, for whatever reason, and some of these reasons are valid, very much want to please their parents and take their parents' needs into consideration. But sometimes it does come at the expense of the relationship. So there's any number of reasons why you want your children to come, for Yantif, to a simcha, to whatever it is. You want to enjoy the nachas, certainly. But let's say if I would come to you and I would tell you, here's the missing piece. Now you know what it is. Now you know why they can't come. Would you be okay with it? You would be okay with it. So pretend there's a missing piece and you're not sure exactly what it is, right? Now, again, I don't want to downplay it. It's very challenging. It's certainly challenging.
Very complicated. It's very complicated.
Especially when you factor in siblings.
Right, sure.
Siblings come more often. Maybe that it works for them, right? And a lot of times parents will say that, I don't understand. This brother or this sister comes all the time. They love being in our home. Why do you not like being in our home? And it's nothing to do with it. It's not that I don't like it.
Chevy, back in the day when I was writing a Q&A column, a weekly Q&A in the Jewish Press a lifetime ago. I got a letter from a couple that the wife loved to have company, and the husband just couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
He just didn't, they wrote that she writes, he's the most amazing husband in the world, but he just wants quiet. You said that the wife feels burdened by company, but she loved it. And they wrote, like, what should we do here? Now, normally you'd say, well, 50-50, want to each give a turn. And I responded that, and as I feel that, I wrote back to them that your desire to have company is a want. Your husband's need for menucha, after a whole day of work, if he just wants to be by himself with you and the children, and he says, listen, I just don't have the energy. I'm in sales. I'm busy talking to people all day. I'm in chinuch, and I just don't want to talk to anybody on Shabbos other than you and the kids. That's a need. Bumps a want. He gets to say he wants quiet. I'm not sure if everybody would agree with that, but that's fine. That's life.
A lot of times what I suggest to couples is what would benefit the relationship more. This is what you want and this is what he wants, right? But which one, or maybe a combination of these, or maybe a third option that neither of you wants, what does the relationship want? What does your marriage want? And it's almost like there's a third party.
I see why people keep coming to you. That's great. I never thought of that, heard it, or shared it till now. Really, that's brilliant. What does the relationship?
I'm happy to say. I always kind of think of it as almost like the Shechina component of your relationship, right? Like there's a third representation of the marriage, right?
It's the it.
Exactly. And I would encourage parents to look at it the same way, right? There's what I want, and there's what my child wants, right? And my child together with their spouse. But what's best for our relationship? Because again, I don't think that, kind of referencing what we said before about parents prioritizing their relationship with their children and maybe grandparents being wary of that, I think that deep down it's something that all parents can understand. All parents want, a good, healthy, long-lasting relationship with their children, right? So to recognize, okay, I want this, and for some reason my child is resistant. What's most beneficial to my relationship with my child, right? And that, and of course I don't want to, a lot of times I'll hear parents say like, look, I don't want to get involved, right?
But
it's the Shabbos garret of relationships, I don't want to get involved, but, right? And again, I'm not talking about a concern, but, but when there's a difference in terms of what people want. Another thing that,
Okay, go ahead. No. Please.
No, I was going to say another thing that I think sometimes parents overlook with married children is that married, we know that compliments are like just fuel in a relationship, right? And especially in a parent-child relationship. And almost always when I've asked a parent who has weathered like a difficult, episode with one of their children, and I'll ask them like, how did you, this child looks like they came out on top. What did you do? And, and they'll convey something like, I was always complimentary. I always made sure they knew how much I believed in them. Like there was this kind of foundational, like positive energy that this parent gave to the child. And somehow when children get married, that sometimes fizzles out. Parents sometimes think that their children don't need it as much anymore. They're married, they're grown. I've done my thing. they still really, really need to know that their parents believe in them, that their parents support them, that their parents think they're amazing. Yes, compliment their spouse also, for sure, right? But to even just to say to your daughter, this is a beautiful Shabbos. You really want, you have a beautiful home, right? You have a wonderful husband. You have like adorable children, right? Something. It's that same kind of oxygen that single children need, married children need also.
So the grandparents.
Yes. Everybody needs compliments.
Share with me. I found that I found when we talked, a couple of days ago in preparation for this, you mentioned the story about a carriage, a grandparent, parent buying a carriage for their married kids, and that really resonated with me because it was very telling. Please, would you share the story?
So I'll tell you, it was about me. This will include one person.
Say that.
Giving me away. I'm outing myself. It's okay.
Go ahead.
But when my oldest was born, we were living in Eretz Yisrael, and jogging strollers were all the rage then. That was what, they had recently come out as, these lightweight jogging strollers, and everybody in Eretz Yisrael was buying these kinds of strollers because the tires were these big, bulky, like air tires, but it made for a smoother ride over, the bumpy cobblestones and going up and down stairs. And a family member had offered to buy us a carriage, and very, very generously, and I really wanted a jogging stroller, probably because everyone else had it. But also I kept saying, this is what was best, and would be like the best investment. And the person who was buying the carriage for me they weren't so excited about the idea of a jogging stroller. They're like, not classy, and they were, much more inclined to buy me something significantly less practical, but more in line with what they had in mind. And, it was kind of an ongoing conversation, because it was tricky. On the one hand, I was so grateful for the gift, and it was incredibly generous, right? But to be gifted something that, I really didn't need, right? When there was something that was in that same category that I really did need, right? Or want, whatever it might be, right? So it can be really tricky. A lot of times when we're gifting, we have an idea in our own heads of what we'd like to gift, and parents will often do this when it is the prerogative of the gift giver, so I'm not stripping you of that power. But your
recommendation to the gift giver would be?
Well, my recommendation to the gift giver would be to ask the receiver if that is actually helpful to them, right? Or to ask if maybe there's something else that they would prefer. A couple. I taught the Kala several years ago. She has a few children now, but when her first child was born, she had a boy, and her in-laws wanted to pay for the bris. And her in-laws wanted to pay for the bris.
Pay for the bris, uh-huh.
And her parents wanted to pay for the bris. And they didn't want to split the bris. They each wanted to pay for the bris.
That's not the average question that comes my way, I got to tell you.
They both wanted to pay for the bris. And she called me. She was not really sure what to do, because one of the parents had said, well, if I'm not paying for the bris, it's either the bris or nothing, right? I know that this other parent is, has already, they offered first to pay, but either I'm paying for the bris or I'm keeping the money to myself, because what I want to do with what I'm offering is the bris. The fact that same money could be put towards something else that, that would be extremely useful and appreciated, the parent was not interested in that, right? And she kind of called me for guidance. Now, obviously, these things are tricky because it's not, it usually says so much more about the relationship than it's not actually the bris, right? It's something else. But a situation like that could really potentially be mitigated by parents, saying, let's say, as opposed to saying, I want to pay for the bris, saying, I want to help you. And this is about how much, I'm willing or able to help you with at this time. Maybe offering a few choices. What's more helpful to you? This, that, the other thing, right? Can I just give it to you and I'll leave it up to you? Now, I understand from the perspective of the gift giver, that's not as fun. right? It feels less powerful, right? But again, if the priority is the relationship and the priority is, our child's needs versus how we feel being the gift giver, then maybe, perhaps, right, we can go about it a different way. A lot of children have really expressed to me, I wish they wouldn't. I just wish they would just, as much as we struggle, as much as it doesn't feel worth it, right? There's either strings attached, or we have to do it this way, we have to do it that way, and I almost, now, on the other hand, there are also children who I've spoken to who really, they rise to the occasion, and their parents raised them so beautifully, and they'll say things like, my parents is, investing in something significant, let's say education, okay? I had a similar experience, that a student of mine was going back to school, and her parents offered to pay a big chunk of her schooling fees, which is, and when you're, paying your tuitions also for your children, and, you're in a younger stage of life, tens of thousands of dollars towards a degree is a lot. Mm-hmm. And her parents offered, said, we want to help you with that. But there were two things. First of all, they said, we want to help you with that. And then every semester, it was this very unpleasant, circle of, he said, do you want to help me? Because here's the bill, and then kind of trying to it was unpleasant, right? And just in terms of that. And then also parents wanted, these parents in particular were very involved in helping her choose the program that she was studying in. They really felt they wanted her to go to one program over the other. And this woman was 32 years old, right? And also they wanted to see her grades.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
They wanted to see, well, I'm paying for it.
I'm paying for it, right? Now, I hear both sides. I hesitate to,
but
right. I think the reason I chose to share that example versus some other example, I'm flying you in to Eretz Israel. I want to decide how you're spending your time, right? There are a lot of areas where, okay, I hear that, but I don't hear that much, I don't hear that side of it. So I wanted to choose an example that was pretty cringy in terms of ooh, grades. You want to see your 32-year-old daughter's grades, and she's trying her best. She's juggling so many things. She's also working. She also has kids. That's a huge pressure for her.
Let's try that. Let's fly the parent side. The parent says, yeah. I'm spending $10,000, $20,000 on tuition, and I just don't see her applying herself. And she's close to. She's not working as hard for those grades as I worked for the money that I'd love to have in my retirement.
Right. Or, I want to see her, they have an idea in their mind of what would constitute gratitude, right? And this is what they expect in return. Now, so I would say, and we had this conversation also, this kind of speaks to a larger conversation around parents, offering financial support, or a lot of times parents feeling pressured to give financial support.
Shevi, just for a second, I want to tell you, in my generation, it was not unusual for a father of a girl, who expressed interest to support a son-in-law in Kollel for a number of years, to actually talk and learning to the guy.
Yes, that's still often the case.
I got that in somebody's house. I kid you not.
Yeah.
I told the shadchan came and said, listen, the guy said he's willing to support you for whatever it is. Not the woman I married. No, but I told the shadchan, do me a favor. If it goes to a second date, I'm fine with that. Not the first date.
Right.
But it was interesting. From his perspective, he would say, check the grades. And I guess, I wasn't offended by it. I imagine today probably would have a much bigger problem with it.
I still know people whose fathers-in-law expect weekly email or something, with a thought on the parsha, and something really in depth, and they want to feel like they're getting a return.
Shareholders report.
Sorry.
Shareholders report.
Right. Right. Exactly. So it definitely is a subject that creates a lot of tension. I would say there's a couple of fallouts. Number one, the fact that it can actually create tension in the marriage. So, I really advocate for whatever the financial arrangements are, they be clear. Let's say even in that situation of, a father-in-law who expects to hear weekly from his son-in-law, okay, that was something that it's between him and his son-in-law, and this is, a request that he made, but it wasn't like he expected something and he never communicated the request, and now he's resentful that he's not getting the email that he never asked for, right? So even if, in that case, at least the expectations are clear. But it can create a lot of tension between the couple. It can put couples often in a situation where they really haven't learned how to talk about money and how to budget as a family. And very often by the time they're in a situation where they need to be, financially independent, and they need to really quickly learn those budgeting skills, they have a much larger budget. So they haven't really been eased into this type of communication, just balancing this type of responsibility. And I do think that there are ways to financially assist and support your children, and also give them the opportunity to exercise some of that, responsibility.
I recommend that that parents who intend to support the children in any way, whether it's college or kollel or anything,
Right.
should be honest and upfront with them and talk about it in concrete terms. Not, I'll support you as long as I can, or epis, for as long as you're matzliach, successful.
Yeah.
You're saying that they should, your experience, I would concur with that completely, but that parents should have an honest, open conversation with real words.
Real words. Real words, full sentences, a conversation that they should have with their child, again, before they get married, and it's a conversation that parents should have with children as couples also. And I fully respect how uncomfortable that can possibly be, but the fallout of not having a conversation like that can be far more uncomfortable. Or as like my husband likes to say, over-promise and under-promise and over-deliver. So that, and in that case, sure, by all means, say that you can do less, and then your children can be pleasantly surprised, versus implying. There's a lot of implications. And a lot of this, by the way, can actually really be misunderstandings. Parents can assume that what's expected of them is one thing, and then their children will come and say, well, my friend's mother, or this person's father-in-law, whatever it is doing this, that, and the other thing. And parents will say oh, well, when I said support, that is not what I had.
We have our biases. If you're watching a baseball game, depending on what team you're on, you decide if the guy's safe or out at first base. Depending, you see what you want to see. So the guys walk away. The two parties walk away from each other having heard very different things.
Yeah. Or somebody shared with me not too long ago that when she visits her married children who live, in a place with a lot of young couples, and they live out of town. They come to visit, and she feels like her children expect her, to buy takeout or to take them out to eat. She feels like that's an expectation that her children have of her. And she realized that the reason they have this expectation is because in the young community where they live, that's something that they see. They see their neighbors and their friends having parents come to visit, and they take them out to eat, and right, exactly. So it can be tricky. A lot of times we feel like we're playing catch up. I didn't know that was the expectation, so I didn't have the conversation with you because I didn't, because I didn't know. But and I was to say to children also, a surefire way to be disappointed is to have endless expectations. So I really, really encourage the young, just to kind of put some parents at ease, I really encourage young people not to have those expectations, and not to expect, and not to expect all kinds of pampering from their parents. That's my because I know a lot of parents who love when their children come to them for Yom Tov, and they like to give their daughters or their daughters-in-law a break, and Yom Tov is like a vacation. But then I'll hear that before Yom Tov, and then after Yom Tov I hear like the resentment, right? And I tell young people, what? Why? Why? The expectation of and again, this kind of goes back to, let's say, taking the the example of Yantif, to have a conversation in advance, right? How can I be helpful to you on Yantif? What are things that I can do in advance? Because everybody will have, different abilities and different capacities. So, one daughter or daughter-in-law might say, look, it's very hard for me, to help with cleaning and serving and things like that, because I'm also trying to, maintain the decorum of my, quote unquote, wild children, right? Who you are not happy with how I'm parenting them. So I'm trying my best to keep my lid on that. So, but I do want to help you. So what are some other things that would be helpful? As opposed to, a lot of times I'll hear from daughters-in-law say, my mother complains that, I didn't help over Yantif, and I, afterwards, 2 weeks later, I get, the laundry list and everything. But every time I walk to the kitchen to say, is there anything that I can do? My mother-in-law said it's done already. Right? And I was left feeling like so again, these conversations in advance, we, a couple of years ago had a huge family Yantif. It was my grandmother's birthday, and we had a bunch of cousins, married cousins with their children, right? And parents, like everybody was together for Yantif in one aunt's home. And I give her a tremendous amount of credit. She sent us a very detailed email in advance, which meal we were responsible, for the setup or the serving or the clearing. And she didn't put spouses in the same meal so that there would be another spouse, to cover the children. The things that we were expected to bring. And it was very, very considerate. She wasn't asking us to do a tremendous amount. But I felt, and she thought everybody gets one towel when they arrive. You're responsible.
Get out of here. You're kidding me.
Because it was just, we were literally like 50 people in one place. So she said, this is what I have. If you want more towels, feel free to bring your own, and we were joking about it at the time, but it was such an enjoyable Yantif because everybody knew what was expected of them.
I think, one common theme, we're almost out of time, Shevi.
Yeah.
It's been so delightful having you, really. I really appreciate your insight and I learned two things already. That's a big deal. The Avi Shulman, he always says that he says, well, it's a generational thing. So he used an example of a pen. He said if you go to a lecture and you don't bring along a pen and paper, it's like going to a kiddush and you don't have a fork. So I always say, if you listen and you walk away with an idea or two, it was a good day. So you gave me certainly two things to think about. I want one thing consistent, I guess I'm hearing from you in all across parenting and the children and the couples is really communication. That's really what I think the overall message that you're saying is encouraging people parents and children, their stakeholders, to have real conversations with each other, preferably in advance.
Yes, proactive communication.
One of the two that I really remember is what you said about having a challenging child. Tell the grandparents what's going on. And why you're doing this. Really. I thank you so much for your time. Thank
you for having me.
You should have hatzlacha in your amazing work. And nachas from your beautiful family. Thank you so much.